everybody. It's Helen Hillix, and I am your host for Sacred Sexuality Revealed, Secrets of Passionate Intimacy, Deeper Connection, and Long-Lasting Desire. And I'm so excited to bring you this summit right now in this chaotic time in our world to center us on what's really important in life. And I have a wonderful guest today, Briana MacWilliam, who's an art therapist, and she's got some really great insights and exercises to offer, but I don't want to talk about her right now. I want to say just a couple of words about why I'm doing this summit, and then I will tell you a lot more about her and we'll dive right in. Before the pandemic, I had already set up all of this and done most of the interviews, and then the pandemic hit, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to be so disruptive. And then I thought, oh my, why is that? It's actually the best time in the world for people to take time and really focus on developing their intimacy and their relationships, because a lot of people have some time right now. And it's also something to get your mind off the fear and onto love. So I did this originally because I've had my own sexual painful history back in the sexual revolution days, and because I've been a licensed therapist for 35 years, and I've seen countless people, individuals, couples, men, women, anywhere on the gender fluid spectrum, and all of them have issues with intimacy because we're not taught how to do it. So I have a passion for it. I already had a passion for it, and now with the pandemic, I have even more of a passion for it. So let me tell you a little bit about Briana, and you'll get to know her a lot better over the next few minutes. Briana MacWilliam is a licensed, board-certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator with 14 years of experience in the field. She helps adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self-doubting to self-sovereign. I wanted to pause on that because that is so important, from self-doubting to self-sovereign, and calling in those passionate partnerships that they want without having to talk in circles around their feelings for hours or even years on end with no tangible result. Using a psycho-spiritual approach she calls, quote unquote, the MacWilliam method, which is trademarked. So thank you so much for being with us today, Briana, and I can't wait to dive in with you about art therapy. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Good. I want to start out with asking you a very time-sensitive question about why is it important right now for people to be focusing on intimacy and the development of love, whether it's for themselves or with a partner?
Well, we're having so many of our normal routines disrupted, and in particular, our survival fears are being stimulated. And in a normal circumstance, when we are posed with a threat, the body has a natural response, which is to generate healthy anxiety, which is compel us to focus on the threat and either fight it or run away from it, right? Fight or flight response. And so a certain level of survival anxiety is expected. That's what keeps us alive. So as a global society, all of us are experiencing elevated levels of that because we are increasingly aware of there being a pervasive threat. But what's so difficult about this threat is that it's basically invisible to us. And it's kind of like a hurry up and wait situation. So there's this amorphous kind of anxiety that's sort of floating around and very diffuse in our bodies right now with no focal point for it and no way to kind of eliminate it. So when that happens, it's kind of like, most of our survival mechanisms for dealing with survival threats are our attachment relationships. And that is actually why when we talk about attachment relationships and we are prompted with stimulus that makes us think about our attachment relationships, the part of the brain that lights up, primarily the limbic system, is where we also see our survival instincts light up. So our connections with loved ones, we consider to be our attachment figures. But, when we talk about intimacy is really more of a bonded experience. So attachment's about survival. Intimacy is about the quality of the bond that you create with the people you depend upon for survival, right? So when we are in a situation like this, normally what we do to survive is we try to strengthen our relationships. We try to strengthen those bonds because we survive, we survive more when we have strength in numbers. But of course, the prescribed precautions are to social distance.
Right.
So it's so intriguing because we have this interesting paradoxical circumstance where it's almost like it's the perfect storm for us to be experiencing the spotlight shown on what our human propensity is for dealing with intimacy issues, whether it is avoidance, like fear of intimacy, or whether it is becoming more anxious. And that's kind of like when we're overly clingy and reaching for, and we don't know how to get any of our own needs met, And what's also kind of intriguing is that our intimacy can be kind of threatened at this time because when we're in crisis situations, all of our old paradigms get kicked up. And a lot of us, especially if we have insecure attachment, we either thrive in crisis situations because it brings up those old, ongoing, unpredictable crisis scenarios in the family system. And maybe we learned how to be in charge in situations like that. So we're like, yes, a crisis situation. I know my role here, right? If things become very clear, we become novelty seeking. We like, we're scanning the feed and Facebook looking for what's the next coronavirus thing going on. And then on the other hand, you've got folks who become like overwhelmed by that. They become swamped by the anxiety. They freeze, and they feel inconsolably unsafe. It's like bringing up all of that old stuff, like predictably unpredictable things are happening. And so instead of running towards the fire, they want to run away from it, right? Or douse it. So, it's interesting because really our intimate relationships become so crucial because in some ways we're sort of involuntarily being enrolled in a crash course that forces us to look at how are we actually experiencing our intimate relationships, right? Because some partners are being forced apart, especially those relationships that are just budding or those relationships that maybe are still new. Is the partner going to move closer towards you under a survival threat? Or does that partner move away from you under a survival threat? Do they, even if you can't be in the same, home, are they connecting the other ways that are possible through Zoom, through texting, through phone calls, whatnot? Or they're like, I'll check back with you in 6 months and see how things are going, So
Right.
I think it is a time where if we can access our intimate relationships for support, then that is a benefit.
And, and I thought of the other kind of extreme is, oh my God, my husband or wife is going to be with me 24/7. And even in that kind of situation, it's like they're going to be there anyway. And you know what? Maybe you could take this as an opportunity to make that one last effort to see if you can at least understand each other better and become more friendly. And who knows, it could be a resurgence of your love. It's possible.
Well, and also strengthen your boundaries with each other, right? Because so being in an intimate space together, well, how can we exist in this intimate space in such a way that we can still honor what space is required for it to have emotional breathing room, while at the same time sharing physical proximity, right? And that means that you have to come together in conversation to be crystal clear about your boundaries. And so often in relationships, people are not clear about their boundaries. And so you have that, I got to be with my partner all this time response, because they haven't been cultivating their boundaries all along. So they've been taking kind of like the easy solution, which is I'm not going to vocalize it. I'm just going to find another way around this so I don't have to have experience a moment of tension or anxiety when I vocalize that the thing that I want might be different than what my partner wants, right? And so when that happens, it's a form of people pleasing, but it's also a form of deception, because we're well intentionally trying not to hurt someone else's feelings, but in doing that, you're also not showing up in your fullest authenticity, which is a form of deception. It's kind of like a lie of omission. So then that's kind of how we grow apart in relationships, is we're just trying to please the other. Meanwhile, we're not showing up. And so we do literally grow apart because neither one is privy to whatever the growth process is going on inside the other. So I think that it's a ripe opportunity to be looking at where are the chisms that are existing in your relationship, and how can this pressured situation force us to actually start to vocalize who and what we are and what it is that we really need. And that may include emotional spaciousness while in close physical proximity. And how are you going to be very specific about establishing those boundaries?
And it may involve facing the depth of resentments that you have toward your partner that have caused you to live basically parallel lives. Sometimes for years, people have lived parallel lives, and they have great boundaries. They just don't relate. You know what I mean? They have very solid boundaries. They just don't relate. But now it's an opportunity. You know, you can try to live that separate but in the same house life. But why not take this as an opportunity to see what's salvageable there, even if it's just a friendship?
Well, sure. And I think also we have a tendency to think that this looks like having a conversation, but like, so for example, I have a course that I call Relationship Rescue, and it's basically 7 dates, but each one of the dates is a nonverbal creative exercise. So you're actually connecting in what I call a play space. So, you know, we might say our boundaries are good, our boundaries are solid, but sometimes solid boundaries are actually the problem.
Absolutely.
You know,
totally agree.
Right. So it's actually, you know, in terms of like, we grow up so much with the idea that in order for us to be in a relationship, it has to involve a need satisfaction relationship, right? Like we're so identified with our needs, and we're so identified with if you can't give me that, then I can't love you, or I can't be in this relationship, or my regard for you is depleted. And that's a form of emotional bondage. And so but actually, if we're able to be flexible with our boundaries, in fact, you know, whatever the other person's interests are, or are not, doesn't have to actually reflect on our level of interest in who they are as a human being and how we relate to them, you know?
I love that. That is, oh my God, that is golden. I mean, that is so core. We live in a world, don't we, Briana, where the instant gratification rules. You know, if she doesn't want to have sex, I'm going to go masturbate to pornography, or vice versa. You know, it's like there's just instant. I got to have what I want, and it isn't even what I need, really, because it's not fulfilling. But
well,
yeah. But I love what you're saying, that, you know, we are. I mean, this kind of came as a shock to me later in life when I realized that we couple because we think that other person is going to meet my needs.
Mm.
We don't couple to say, I want to have a partner on the journey of life. And, you know, I'm going to have some needs met and some needs not met, and you're going to have some needs met and some needs not met, but we're going to partner. That's not what we do. We say, oh my God, he makes a lot of money and I need money. Or, oh my God, she's so sexy and I want sex. And it's like, that's how we couple. Yeah. And then we get into the daily life, and it's exactly what you said. You know, if you're not meeting my needs, I don't want you.
Right. Yes, you know, it's a different sentiment. And a lot of people, I think, when they come to asking the questions that we're kind of exploring here today, they usually ask a question, well, if I can meet my own needs, what's the point of being in a relationship? And it's like, it's such a conditional form of love, you know? And it's sort of like when people say, well, I have enough friends, I don't need any more friends. You know, very in, out, black, white. It's a very dispassionate actually way of being. It's not very compassionate, and it's not very allowing, and it actually prevents us from seeing, knowing, and understanding the people we are with. We're just seeing them through our own lens of need and desire and self-gratification. But you know, what's interesting is that, and that's not to say I think compatibility and incompatibility is a very real thing. I think you can find that there are partners that are less, more or less compatible in terms of what are the concrete commitment of things like time, energy, and resources that will be exchanged over time. I think that's a very real world discussion. But because we have a diffuse sense of boundaries, we don't really understand, or we have a rigid sense of boundaries, we don't realize that our love, our regard, our appreciation, our gratitude for what someone else brings into our experience just by simply being who and what they are, that is not necessarily tied into the needs exchange, let's say. But I also usually use this metaphor like, okay, well, you might be able to scoop your own ice cream, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy going to the ice cream parlor on a hot summer day and enjoy having someone scoop it for you and then participating in that activity. And it's so much more pleasurable when you can just leisurely stroll and enjoy that activity, as opposed to if you think you're going to die if you can't claw your way to the ice cream salon, and if that teenager doesn't scoop the ice cream for you, then you're just going to die and you can't love them, right? It comes from a very different place. It's the same action, but one person may be going there because they think their survival and their never-ending happiness depends on that ice cream being scooped by someone else. And the other person shows up knowing that they are completely capable of scooping their ice cream if and when they want to. But isn't it so fun to invite somebody else into that experience and to share a reflection on the moment? That's how I talk about it.
That is so great. It's so fun. It's such a fun way of thinking about such a deep, deep topic of self-love and wholeness, by thinking of scooping ice cream. But it's real. It's something, oh my God, I get that. I get that. And so many couples don't focus on developing their own wholeness. And I don't mean, again, that, you ought to masturbate instead of putting in the effort to clean up your relationship so that you can be sexual with your partner. Mm-hmm. But I know you're talking about it on more of a spiritual, emotional wholeness way of looking at it.
We can talk about it in a sexual energy context. So for example, sometimes people will say to me, so a lot of times partners will say to me, well, there is one thing that you can't get on your own, and that's sex. And this is where I usually ask people to expand their understanding of what sex is. And sex as being an expression of energy. And sex can be many things. Sex can be a handshake. And then sex can be a vehicle through which you experience the deepest, expansion of energetic and soul connection with someone. If we look at it from the outside, it's the same observable behavior, let's say, but what's different about it is what you're bringing to it energetically on either level, right? And I'm not saying one is better or worse. I would never say that there's a hierarchical standard here. But being aware of your boundaries is also being aware of what you want to get out of sex, what you want to experience in that moment. And the more you can have a command of your energetic boundaries and awareness of how you expand and contract your energetic boundaries, then you can have handshake sex with someone and be like, hey, that was great. High five for that. And then have another partner with whom you experience this amazing spiritual universal merging and be like, oh, that was great too. You can have it all. You don't have to pick one or the other and assign some kind of moral conundrum to it. But I think that what's interesting to me is when people say things like, you can only experience this through that, and in order for me to have that, it has to be through the other. I think that's kind of a misnomer. And it tells me that, wow, there's a lot of your vital energy that you are not expressing in a variety of other facets of your life that you could be. And you're relegating it to this one act because that is what society tells you to do, and or because that's what, for some reason, that's what you think it's relegated for. And so you only experience yourself as in alignment with your vital energy through that act. And if that's the case, then yeah, you're going to think that having another partner is a gatekeeper to your own energy. And so what I usually, when I talk about this, I usually try to get people to understand that sexual energy is a tapping into source energy. And if you can be more aligned with your source energy, you can start to understand how your own vital / sexual energy expresses itself in a variety of, let's say, buckets in your life, right?
You are the only one other person I know who taught this to me. You are the only other person I've ever heard who said that, who said that sexuality is the connecting energy of the universe, and therefore it's on a spectrum between hello, how are you, a handshake, over to, intercourse and deep intimacy and ecstasy, in a sacred union kind of way. Mm-hmm. And I totally resonate with that. And I'm so excited to hear you talking about it, because the expansion of the definition of what sacred sexuality is the key to being liberated from all those limiting thoughts and feelings of, oh my God, I'm alone and I can't ever have it. And, it's like you can have it all day long. You can walk out in nature and feel the sexual energy between you and the trees and the sky and the water. Yeah. And it completely changes your life. And I love that you're emphasizing that. And that's a core of what you offer. That really makes me totally admire and respect what you're teaching. Of course, because it aligns with what I believe, but it's because it's so liberating.
Yeah.
If you can't do that, you're going to, like you said, it just narrows you down so much. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to get off onto this unless you feel guided, but don't you think our society teaches men to genitalize their need for connection?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And women, are taught to please the man in order to get their need for connection. And it's like, again, it goes back to expanding that, to being the whole you.
Mm-hmm. And then we have folks who are, I think the term used before, like on the gender fluid spectrum, who their sexual development and evolution and self-exploration process is totally ignored. Like we don't have like a developmental trajectory of sexuality for what we have now, are the burgeoning, and maybe they were always there, but now there's just more freedom to express oneself on a fluid continuum. But that there are these burgeoning experiences of discovering oneself and their own sexual energy and how it expresses itself either through gender expression or sexual orientation or whatever it is. That what's interesting to me is we sort of have this understanding of polarity, and now we have so much freedom to express that polarity in a variety of shades of gray, whereas before we kind of had black or white to work with. Mm-hmm. And so I think what's really fascinating about what's emerging through human relationship right now is what kinds of permission are being granted for being in dialogue with the self, and understanding what of this energy is mine, what of this energy is conditioning, what of the shame that I might be carrying around with me is connected to a painful childhood memory versus a societal, more, so forth and so on. And there's so much more space to be asking ourselves those questions and exploring them in the relational space these days.
I love that. And within the, even though I identify as heterosexual, I can be attracted to, I'm attracted to you. You're a gorgeous, sexual, luscious being. It's like I can feel that. I don't feel inclined to have sex with you at this time in my life, but whatever. I really believe that if we let ourselves be open to it, we could feel our healthy sexual connection to all being without the fear that we're going to do something weird, according to society. And I think that's, really what you're addressing is, to that liberation of ourselves. And part of the exploration of intimacy is, how do I feel, toward other genders? And I just think it's an exciting time in that way too.
Yeah.
I want to allow you and encourage you to talk also about your own specific gifts. And I know that art therapy and a psycho-spiritual perspective is, we've been talking about that part, but I wanted to dive into the art therapy part and how art therapy has the ability to sidestep or go around the ego a lot more than talk therapy sometimes. Can you talk about how the work you do relates to all these things you've been talking about?
Mm-hmm, sure. So, we were kind of talking about the expression of energy and things like that. And I think in the work that I do, so I'm a creative arts therapist. So my influences are very body-based, which is to say that, a lot of psychotherapeutic practices in the past, and I will say that's expanded tremendously, especially in the past decade. But in the past, it's been a large focus on talk therapy, a large focus on cognitive behavioral constructs, which I do think is important, and that is a facet of what I do. But what we are learning about with trauma research and attachment research and things like that is that it's very embodied. Our experience of, let's say, insecure attachment, or if we have, conflicts in our interpersonal relationships. And we notice that there are repetitive patterns of calling in the same kinds of partners, experiencing the same kinds of disappointments in relationship, and maybe even then having tremendous insight into it, but then not being able to feel any differently. I know I keep choosing the wrong partners. I've learned all the red flags. And every single time I think I've made a better choice, 3 months down the line, I realize I'm dating the same person again, right? So what with art therapy, what we're doing is we're looking at the body's role in that. So you can change the way you think about something, and that can have some impact on the choices you make. And ideally, the environment's going to respond in a different way to different choice making. But sometimes our felt experiences don't respond as we would like. And it's because we have our body, our cell memory is going to have a response to something from our early childhood, theoretically speaking, or could be from a traumatic experience in adulthood. And that's going to carve a certain groove in, like I said before, the survival part of our brain. And so our higher learning, our neocortex, kind of experiences a severance from the limbic brain. And so the limbic brain is kind of caught on a loop, responding, reacting, experiencing, the body being the first organizer of experience, taking in its stimulation in a certain way that does or does not get communicated to the neocortex, your cognition. So it's almost like you experience kind of a split, right? And people who experience dissociation, for example, we'll talk about this being like a numbing out or not being able to access their feelings kind of thing. So what creative arts therapies does is it uses creative modalities, dance, art, music, drama, things like that, to activate the body in nonverbal ways, in symbolic ways, in metaphorical ways. That is a language that is, let's say, a better translation for unconscious material, right? Because whenever we find ourselves caught in repetitive patterns, it's typically for unconscious reasons, and that's what lands us in something like therapy. I don't know why I keep doing this. I don't know why I keep attracting the same partners. So what you're doing is you're saying, I don't know how to be in deeper conversation with my unconscious self, we might say with my source energy, my essential self, right? Whatever vernacular feels comfortable. And so how do I do that, right? And so it becomes, I believe that with creative arts therapies, we sort of, the creative process becomes a playing field on which, let's say, the head and the heart get to have a conversation. And once they're able to be in conversation, this is where like spirit or source energy or your, what I like to call your essential self, starts to wield its own interpretation between the information it's gathering from the head and the information it's gathering from the heart. And now we get to externalize it outside of us through dance, movement, art making, and we get to play with it in ways that remind us of our own agency, that remind us of the power we have to create our own realities by making adjustments to what we experience internally. And at the same time, we're accessing the body and its resources to, let's say, rewire those synaptic grooves that have been carved into our cell memory and into our synaptic pathways, right? So and symbols are laden with meaning. They're so full of energy. And if we could translate this into an energetic language, the idea that when you have something happens to you, something significant happens to you that has a high emotional charge, let's say, then you could say that experience constellates around, let's say, a charge of energy. Like it has a certain amount of energy that gets tied up in it. And I believe that in psychology, we say, well, it gets split off and buried in the unconscious. Well, I think what happens is that energy, yes, it goes into the unconscious, but then it gets lodged in the body somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it finds muscle fibers to hang on to, or it finds an organ to hang out in, and it hangs out there until we have some kind of big moment in our life or catalytic moment in our life where your soul, your essence, your higher knowing, the essential self basically says, oh, great, you're ready. It's ready. We're ready to dig this up and we're ready to work on this. So now our contexts then call forth these energetic charges that are ready for whatever reason to be released. So
I love that, because I think people can really resonate with that, the reality of that people are aware that, God, I keep having this pain right here and I don't know what that is. And, body workers will tell you, you've got a pain, something stuck right here. I mean, people get that their traumas are stuck in their bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote down something else. Would you give us an example of what you, just one example of, okay, somebody came to me with this buried trauma. They didn't understand how it kept replaying, and this is what we did, and this was the outcome.
So I'll give you an example of what the most common thing that people come to me with, and then maybe I can walk you through how. So in the MacWilliam method, there's 3 steps that I usually apply to almost every situation, and that is,
what is the method?
I call it the MacWilliam method.
Oh yeah.
I tried to trademark it something else, but trademark law is hard. But so there's 3 steps, and that's cognitive reframing, body activation, and arts-based experiential. So for example, most people will come to me and they'll say, how do I make it work with this person? Right? How do I get that person back? Or I want a partner so that I don't have to feel alone, right? Or I want a partner because life sucks unless I'm partnered. And usually what first thing we do is a form of cognitive reframing, and that means looking at typically the question that they are asking me is usually an offshoot of a fear-based belief or a scarcity attitude, right? So the desire, the want is, I need a partner. Why? Well, because I don't want to die alone. So the thing that you're expressing and that you are acting on is actually a fear-based belief. And if we have someone who is insecurely attached, for example, that fear-based belief typically stems from some form of early trauma. So first we take a look at the want and recognize the want as a fear-based expression. You might call it an ego-based expression, right? So the partner is going to band-aid this and that's going to make me okay. But there's so many underlying premises to that we have to dig into first, because so what are the underlying premises? I'm not okay on my own. I can't be happy about life unless I'm partnered. Without a partner, I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. If someone doesn't want me, then that means I have no inherent value, et cetera, et cetera. So then we look on the backside of that fear as an expression of a deep, let's say, spiritual desire, of a deeper expression that we are not on an ego, let's say, conscious mind level acknowledging. And the deeper desire is not, I want a partner so I die alone. The deeper desire is then, I know and I trust and I believe and I can feel all the connections that I always have at all times. I am completely trusting and aware that I could never actually be alone, even if I tried, because I am so tapped into my source energy that anyone with whom I come in contact is someone through whom I can experience my connection to all that is. And even if it is someone with whom I experience conflict or contrast, I know then that there's something, a message, a gift, a wisdom there for me. And isn't that kind of an exciting possibility to realize that I can't get it wrong? There's no actually right or wrong way to do this. And if I only open myself up to the myriad of different connections that can be made with the people in my life, I can recognize that beyond a narrow scope of romanticism, that there's actually a tremendous sense of vital energy that I can be expressing, so I don't feel so alone, because I never really could be. Right. And so that becomes the deeper desire, and we attend to it. That's cognitive reframing. We attend to restate the desire, right? Notice where it's resonating. And usually when you create a statement like that, the body's going to have a strong response. It's going to feel good at first, and then you're going to start crying, because then the ego's like, whoa, that puts us way out of control, and we're not gonna, that's unacceptable, because life hasn't proven that to us, and the ego is very concerned with finding evidence to support its suppositions. So then all of the beliefs come up. that's not possible, it can't be, I don't feel that way, blah, 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 and so then we look at that and we notice where in the body do you experience that response to what is the underlying expression here, and then we can externalize it through the art-based experientials. And so usually in my practice, that looks like a combination of guided visualization, could be some sound healing and drumming, and usually some kind of drawing or externalization of whatever the internal dialogue is. So it could also be like dialoguing with whatever part comes up, right? Giving it a personality, like a self part, if you've heard of that. But the idea that these energy, balls that we've been talking about embedded in the body, imagining that it has its own consciousness and that it has its own personality and that it has a wisdom for you, or it has something it wants to say to you. And if you're experiencing it and it comes up, then it's time to be in dialogue with it.
I love what you were saying about that once you get that you cannot be separated from all that is, even if you try, you cannot be separated from that. And when you have that awareness, I mean, I'm not saying that's the end of the process. I know that's just step one, but when you have that awareness, you can be in the energy of love, in the energy of connection. Mm-hmm. And when we're in the energy of love and connection, we're not thinking, I have to have a partner. It's because you already are in it.
Yeah.
I just think that is so powerful, what you were saying about that. And for that people to really take that in, that we are longing for a partner because we want the feeling that comes with it. Mm-hmm. But you can be in that feeling state just by shifting your mindset.
And of course, the irony is once you shift into the feeling state, then you start attracting people who are in a similar right. feeling state, right? And then that feels like a kind of like, to give you another metaphor, when people are looking outside of themselves to generate that, it's kind of like imagining that you've got two people underwater and they're just passing an oxygen tank between them, like kind of goes back to that conditional love we were talking about before. Mm-hmm. They're just passing the energy back and forth between them. But when both have a sense of source connection to themselves, now they've both got their own oxygen tanks. And when you've got your own oxygen tank, now you both can go deep diving. And when you go deep diving, there's creatures down there that create their own luminescence. I mean, the wonders that you can find and with how deep you can go. And that means that there's so much more freedom from a form of emotional bondage that allows us to actually connect emotionally on such a deeper level. And to feel really seen and understood, because your partner doesn't have their own agenda for who and what you should be for them, right? And vice versa.
I love that. And it's such a great metaphor for sacred sexuality too, is that, if you are connected to source and they are connected to source, then what you're sharing really is the energy, is that all that is energy. It's not, my ego connecting to your ego.
Right. Yeah.
So what's the third step?
So the third step is arts-based experiential. So we'll start with a statement like that. We'll reframe the way we're thinking about things and then notice where it is in the body. And so that's the body-based part. So the body-based part would be locating where that exists. And actually, depending on what kind of space we're in, there's also physical activities that we can do there's authentic movement, for example, where you might, where is that in your body? And now just allow your body to move and express itself however it feels compelled to do so. That's more of an authentic movement. There could be more guided movement exercises, could just be breathing into it, noticing what comes up as you breathe into it. Could be a guided visualization, could be sound healing or something to that effect. There's a variety of exercises we might do to notice we now have the consciousness raising. Now, how does the body respond to that? And then the third step is the expression, the agency, what action now are we going to take? And the action is sometimes the action is the action of inaction. But even that, recognizing that even the action of inaction has its own momentum. Right. And so sometimes it can be Well, and you might have an experience where I'm just witnessing the depth of the anxiety that I feel right now. And sometimes that's enough for a session, just seeing that it's there without trying to push or pull against it. And so, well, what do we do with that? Well, could you, on the page, using your hands and this chalk, could you just express what it's like to look at that and to feel like you have no agency over it, right? Can you just put out onto the page, what is that feeling, so that we can, look at it outside of you and see how it feels to put it outside of you and just reflect on that. And if there was something you were to add to it, what would it be? If there was something that this thing needed, what might it be? If this thing had a message for you, what would it be? If you were to imagine yourself inside this image looking back at yourself, what does it think of you? And exploring that. And of course, it's metaphorical in a lot of ways, but it's also projective. So we are externalizing an internal dialogue, basically, because I think up until this point, we've often had this notion of the self as being sort of like something you have to integrate lost parts into, right? But I actually feel like that's too much of a static image. I think that we're more like a snow globe, and we have all of these moving parts. And kind of like when you shake a snow globe, let's say that's like a heartbreak in your life, or you lose your job, or a parent dies, or you get sick, right? So it's like we're doing this with the snow globe, and now all these particles get tossed up, and some particles become more or less active, right? And then as it starts to settle, a few will remain floating above, and then the rest will kind of settle. And those parts that are remaining above are the parts that are in operation in whatever context you now find yourself, right? And we may need to get to know those parts, because those parts have come up because they have some wisdom for us in the circumstance in which we find ourselves. But, so the parts become the emotional or the affective, experience that we have. And then, like, let's say the water in which they are swimming is more like the observer, right? That's the part of us that thinks about what we are thinking about. Like, that's the part of us that notices our thoughts, that notices our emotional reaction, that creates spaciousness around it well enough that we can then make decisions about what I'm going to do about it, But I think that less of an integration, more of a constant moving. So if that's the case, then we're not looking for a state of felt security, like static felt security, so much as we're looking for a process by which we can be engaged with each part and allow it to move in and out of our conscious awareness based on when and how it is needed. So it's less of a sense of putting the missing pieces of a puzzle back together. It's more of finding a process by which we can allow for a constant state of expansion and contraction.
Wow.
I've never said it so well before.
The whole paradigm of the world, in 20 sentences. I want to go back and talk about something that you said about, you didn't name it this, but basically dual consciousness, that we are able to develop the part of us that is able to be the neutral observer and not just be dominated by our unconscious impulses and urges and ego messages. And that, to me, is like one of the most fundamental things that will liberate us from making bad choices, whether it's during a pandemic, because we make choices every day, don't we? Mm-hmm. Should I go outside? Should I touch that surface? On and on and on. Should I call my mother? Yeah. And so if we can develop that dual consciousness and as you were saying before, bring to awareness what's going on, that is such an empowering and liberating way to live. Mm-hmm. And then you were saying that you're not offering people an answer, okay, we've solved this problem and this is the answer and therefore you're secure to go forward. That's how the ego thinks. It's like it wants, what's the answer and I want it now. Mm-hmm. And I love what you're saying about what you are offering really is a process. Mm-hmm. that people can use for the rest of their lives mm-hmm. to deal with whatever the challenge may be that higher self observes happening.
Right.
And what an incredible time to be doing that right now, because like you were talking about the snow globe and I was thinking about the earth right now is the snow globe, and it is being shaken. It is being completely shaken, and lots of stuff is floating.
Yeah. Things are surfacing, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I know you said, I don't know if you have time to lead us through that. Is this the exercise you were talking about? Is these 3 steps, or?
We may not have time for it at this point, but I could give a recommendation on a directive, and also the free course that I mentioned. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be giving this to Helen to offer to her listeners. It's a course that walks them through each step, and will give them a directive for dropping a question actually into their body, and discovering what comes up, and then a method by which they can interpret the answer that comes from their own higher knowing.
Love that. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So were you going to say something else? Because
the only other thing I would suggest is, especially in a time like this when we are experiencing a state of diffuse anxiety and we don't have a focus for it, is recognizing that when we are in a circumstance that circumstances, external circumstances are beyond our control, that what we can focus is the internal response to it, right? And so usually what I recommend in times like this is sort of focusing on what trauma work calls the window of tolerance. So basically it starts by locating the most neutral place in your body. So you can just start by, taking a few deep breaths, just giving your soul, your essence, your energy full permission to really sink down into your body. Imagine your feet kind of grounding into the floor, growing roots, like rooting you into the earth, and just taking a couple breaths and just noticing where you might find the most neutral space in your body, and allowing your imagination to inform that. Some people might say, oh, I'm just dreaming this up, or I'm just making this up. But your imagination is how your essential self, your creative self, speaks to you. So even if you feel like you're just imagining it, where might be the safest place in your body? And then just dropping your awareness into there and allowing what information comes to you to come to you. It could be a vision. Some people aren't struggle with visioning. It could just be a sensation in their body. It could be a thought, a memory, a person, or an intuition that pops into their head. But just noticing what you're receiving. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So finding the neutral space, and then you might even touch it with your hand, and then finding what is the part of your body that feels the most activated, right? Like what's the part of the body that feels the most anxious right now, and making contact with that part. And then what you do is a process it's called penduluming. But basically you start in the neutral place, that's like home base. And then you swing or you pendulum towards the place that feels more anxious, or towards the place that feels more stimulated. And you notice it, you imagine you're in that place, you pick up on what the subtleties or the nuances are of what comes to you. And then you try to stay as long as you can until you feel like it's too much, and then you swing back to the neutral place, you pendulum back. And it's something you work up towards, and over time you start to realize that you can tolerate the anxious feelings more and longer and more and longer, and that it doesn't become such a threat to you and to your state of internal equilibrium and balance. And that's a process by which you can also start to increase your ability to what they call self-regulate, right? Not to feel so overwhelmed by your emotions. And after doing a process like that, art making, for example, or drawing it out and then writing down what words come to you, as a free association of what we just said together. I like to do dominant, non-dominant handwriting. So with my dominant hand, I'll write the question, what is the deeper wisdom here? What guidance can I take away from today's activity? And then I let my non-dominant hand write a response based on whatever comes through. And then just reflect on it. So that's an activity that I think for now, like right now, might be a good one to play with, because I think we're going to be experiencing, levels of anxiety for a while yet, and having a process by which we can engage with it so it doesn't take us over, I think is useful.
I think that's really, really powerful. One of the things I've heard in a study a long time ago was that the most difficult pain to tolerate is pain that we don't know when it's going to end. If you sit down and the dentist says, this is going to take 30 seconds, do you want an anesthetic? And I can say, no, not if it's going to take 30 seconds. But if he says, I don't know how long this will take.
Give me the anesthesia.
It's like, absolutely, give me that. And that's how we are right now in this pandemic, is we don't know when it's going to end. And that is the most scary thing about it is, if somebody could say it's all going to be over June 1st for sure, all you have to do is make it to June 1st. Even that, even though it's a long time away, it would be a completely different situation than we don't really know.
Right.
So I love that. That's a really challenging and deep exercise that you just offered, and I really appreciate that. I think I'm going to do it myself.
Sure.
And I can't wait.
You might start, even depending on how you feel, you might just start by exploring the neutral space first. You just start with that and you create an image that represents the neutral space, right? And then the next session, then you swing towards the anxiety. You take it at whatever pace feels comfortable, but this process of learning how to, because oftentimes we swing back and forth, that's where we get caught in a drama cycle, right? Where we're back and forth. Mm-hmm. And it's eventually learning how to be comfortable with discomfort.
And it's sort of like desensitization therapy, where you go and sit on an airplane and then you come back out and then you sit again and you come back out. It's that exposure to the discomfort and realizing that we can manage it. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because that's, to me, is a great way to end our discussion, is talking about, you can do this.
Yeah.
Even though you've talked about it in such brilliant and sometimes, very abstract ways, you've also grounded it, in very direct and grounded exercises that we can do. And so I just want to leave the audience with that thought that you can do this. Mm-hmm. You don't have to live in a way where you feel dominated all the time by your thoughts and your past and all of that. And yet we have a tendency in our society to think, if I just get, speaking about sacred sexuality again, if I just get the latest technique, the latest great toy, the best vibrator, whatever it is, that there's some instant way that we can get that feeling that we're longing for. But everything you're saying is so much broader than that. Yeah. And, I feel like people have tried that other method over and over and over. And that's when they come to me or to you, because they recognize that it really is a much deeper journey. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can do it. And now is the time. It's never been more important. Yeah. So you already mentioned your free gift. Tell people how they can get in touch with you, Briana.
Sure. So yes, this free gift is called 4 Steps to Passionate Partnership, and it's a 4-part video series and downloadable workbook that will walk you through directive and processes like we just discussed here on the call. And with that, if you want to get in touch with me or you want to learn more about other courses that I offer online, you can check out my website at brianamacwilliam.com. I also have Instagram, which is the same thing, Briana MacWilliam. And I have a YouTube channel, same thing, Briana MacWilliam. So it's Briana MacWilliam at large. You can find me on this channel.
I love that. And thank you so much. I know you are one of those people who has your children at home, homeschooling. And I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of what must be an insane schedule now to share your wisdom with us. And, I really have enjoyed connecting to your mind. You have an amazing mind, Briana. I'm sure you've been told that many, many times, but you're very wise and you have really studied. It's so obvious. You have a deep well of information and knowledge and wisdom and caring to offer your clients. So I'm so excited that you came on today, and I know our viewers are going to love you. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a wonderful pleasure.
Thank you.